Obinna adjusted the rusted bolt of the estate gate as the morning sun rose above the high walls that separated wealth from struggle. At just 27, Obinna bore the responsibilities of a man twice his age. His security uniform was clean but faded, his shoes worn at the heels, but his eyes still held the light of hope. He wasn't a man without ambition, far from it. He was the kind of man who kept receipts of school fees and dreamed of transportation businesses during night shifts. Every month, he sent the bulk of his salary to Ngozi, the woman he loved. She was in her third year at the university studying mass communication, and Obinna made sure her tuition was never delayed. He also bought books, paid her rent, and sent pocket money when she cried on the phone about being broke. No one at the estate knew he was feeding a whole family from his gatehouse salary. And even if they did, no one would understand. Ngozi, 22, was beautiful and smart. She often passed through the estate on holidays, her face glowing with youthful confidence. She had a soft voice and a curvy figure that drew attention whenever she walked into the compound. Her mother had died years ago, leaving her with two younger siblings, Ikenna, age 10, and Uju, age 8. Obinna, though not officially part of their family, had stepped into the role of provider. He paid their school fees, bought them books, and even sent monthly stipends to their aunt who housed them in the village. To them, Obinna was like a big brother, even a father. But to Ngozi, he was an embarrassment she tolerated only because of the financial lifeline he offered. She never told her friends about him, never posted pictures with him. She had once said, "You're just helping me, Obinna. Don't misunderstand it." That statement had haunted him for weeks. But his love blinded him. He convinced himself that one day she would appreciate everything. On nights when he wasn't on duty, Obinna would sit in the gatehouse with a small notepad, writing out business ideas. OB Transport Services, he had scribbled once. 10 buses in 3 years. Buy land. Build rental units. Marry Ngozi. He believed in the power of dreams and sacrifice. To him, love meant service. So, when he skipped meals to pay her rent, he didn't complain. When he sold his phone to send her urgent hostel fees, he didn't flinch. But each time she visited the estate, he noticed a shift. How she barely looked at him. How her tone became sharper. How her eyes always scanned for something, or someone better. Still he smiled. Still he served. Because he believed loyalty would one day be rewarded. Obinna had always believed that a man wasn't judged by what he had, but by what he was building. One evening, as the estate lights flickered on, he confided in Uche, a fellow gateman who worked at the estate's back entrance. "One day, I will own my own buses. No more gate. No more being invisible." Uche laughed but nodded. Obinna wasn't like the others. He didn't gossip. He didn't drink. He saved, he read, and he planned. Every weekend, he read free business PDFs on an old tablet a neighbor gave him. He tracked market fares, calculated driver wages, and researched motor parts. Ngozi was at the center of all his dreams. He saw her as his future wife, the woman who would one day stand beside him when he opened his first transport terminal. He imagined her in Ankara gowns, smiling proudly as he cut the ribbon. That image gave him strength. But reality was far less romantic. Ngozi's calls grew fewer, her messages shorter. She didn't pick up for days sometimes, only to call late at night when she needed money for urgent school things. When Obinna gently complained, she would sigh and say, "So now you want to control me because you send money?" That statement broke something in him, but he patched it with hope. She's stressed, he told himself. School is hard. On one of her visits, she walked into the compound wearing high heels and a flowing wig. She barely waved at Obinna. Instead, she went straight to the main house. Obinna stood at the gate, his hands trembling. She didn't even ask if he had eaten. That night, he cried silently in the gatehouse, hiding his tears from the security cameras. Still, Obinna didn't give up. He continued sending money. He gave Ikenna a used laptop for school. He sent Uju storybooks. And when Ngozi's aunt fell sick, he sent money for hospital bills without hesitation. But inside him, something was beginning to die. Love, when unreciprocated, becomes a burden. The very thing that gave him strength was now weakening him. And yet, he remained faithful. Because in his mind, this was the price of loyalty. He had seen movies, heard stories, of men who stood by their women and were later rewarded. He believed his reward was coming. But what he didn't know was that a storm was already gathering behind him. And it had a name: Chief Adekunle. Chief Adekunle was a man in his late 40s with a belly that stretched his designer shirts and a laugh that filled the compound like thunder. He was one of those wealthy Lagos men who always had a cigar in one hand and a political connection in the other. He barely noticed Obinna unless he needed his car washed or his dog walked. But one afternoon, everything changed. Ngozi had come visiting, dressed in a short, elegant gown that shimmered in the sun. As she walked past Chief's car, the man looked up from his paper and whistled slightly. "Who is that fine girl?" he asked. The steward replied, "That's the gateman's friend, sir. She visits sometimes." Chief grinned. "Friend or fiancé?" "I think he likes her, sir. Even said he wants to marry her." Chief chuckled again. A gateman dreaming of queens. Later that evening, Obinna gathered courage and approached Chief respectfully. "Sir, I know it may sound somehow, but I love Ngozi. I've been supporting her through school. I hope to marry her someday." Chief looked at him for a long moment and then nodded slowly. "It's good to love. But remember, boy, love and position are not always friends." With that, he walked away. Obinna thought he understood that Chief would stay away, that the rich man respected his feelings. But Obinna didn't see the flash of interest in Chief's eyes as he watched Ngozi laugh with the maids that night. Something had been ignited. The next day, Ngozi called Obinna angrily. "Why would you tell your boss that you want to marry me? Do you want to embarrass me?" Obinna was stunned. "I was only being honest. I love you, and I wanted to protect what's mine." Her laughter was cold. "What's yours?" "Obinna, don't make me angry. You're a gateman. Stop embarrassing yourself. Stop dreaming." That conversation shattered him. It was the first time she had ever directly called him what society had always whispered behind his back, a nobody. He sat alone that night, staring at the gate he had guarded for years, suddenly realizing he was locking himself inside a prison of love. Obinna noticed the change in Ngozi like a sudden shift in weather, sharp, bitter, and impossible to ignore. She no longer looked at him when she visited the estate, where she once smiled politely and thanked him for opening the gate. She now strutted past him like he was a shadow. The maids began to notice it too, whispering and giggling amongst themselves. Some even mocked Obinna behind his back, calling him lover-boy gateman or boyfriend of madam. It stung, but he swallowed the shame. After all, this was the woman he had invested his soul into. His heart held on to the past, those late-night calls, the laughter, the promises she once whispered about our future. But her actions now were a stark betrayal of those dreams. It wasn't just emotional distance, it was deliberate humiliation, like when she once dropped her handbag at the gate and barked, "Carry that for me," in front of Chief's driver and the gardener. She didn't say please. She didn't look at him. She just walked on. The pain worsened when Chief Adekunle himself began to engage her more openly. She started showing up dressed like someone auditioning for Nollywood glamour roles, tight-fitting clothes, high heels, loud makeup. Her tone became arrogant, her posture taller, her words laced with mockery. One day, as she walked out of Chief's house, she threw a sarcastic, "Good morning, Ogo Obinna," and laughed loudly at her own joke. Obinna stood frozen at the gate, fingers trembling. He knew what was happening. The man who had once laughed at his dreams now had his hands on the woman he once called his future. The betrayal wasn't only romantic, it was symbolic. He felt stripped of his dignity. He tried to talk to her that evening, asking her to meet him behind the servant quarters. When she finally agreed, she came with rolled eyes and a smirk. "What is it this time?" she asked, not even trying to hide her contempt. "Ngozi, have I offended you in any way?" he asked gently. She shrugged. "Obinna, wake up. I'm not your property. You should be grateful I even tolerated you all these years. You're not in my class." As she walked away, Obinna stood there, stunned, crushed, and humiliated. That was the moment he realized he had lost her, not to fate, but to pride and opportunity. She had chosen status over sincerity, riches over roots. The same woman whose hostile fees he once paid had now outgrown him like a snake shedding old skin. And, in her new skin, Obinna didn't exist. But even then, he still hoped that somewhere deep inside her heart, she remembered the man who bought Gary for her siblings, the one who walked to work so she could afford textbooks. But hope is a dangerous thing when you're loving someone who sees your sacrifices as burdens. From that day forward, she would no longer just ignore him. She would begin to treat him like filth. And what hurt most was that she seemed to enjoy it. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when the most humiliating moment of Obinna's life unfolded. Ngozi had returned to the estate after spending a weekend in Lekki with Chief Adekunle. She was carrying a small bag of clothes and a plastic bag filled with what looked like dirty laundry. Obinna opened the gate for her silently. She didn't even acknowledge him. A few minutes later, as he walked back toward the gatehouse, she called out to him in a loud, commanding tone, "Obinna, come here." He turned, confused. "Yes, Ngozi." She lifted the plastic bag and tossed it toward him like someone discarding trash. "Wash these for me. I need them clean and ready before tomorrow." He looked into the bag, panties, bras, leggings, socks, all soaked in perfume and sweat. His heart stopped. "Ngozi," he whispered, "is this really necessary?" Her expression hardened. "You said you love me, right? Then prove it. Or is washing clothes too much for a gateman who claims to care?" The maids snickered in the background. One covered her mouth in fake shock while the other whispered, "Yeah, this girl no get mercy." Obinna's hand trembled as he picked up the bag. Each step he took toward the washing area felt like a nail being driven into his pride. He sat by the tap, soap in hand, as the water ran over the underwear he was scrubbing. With every stroke, he wasn't just washing fabric. He was washing off layers of dignity. He remembered the times he had begged his mechanic friend to lend him money for her exams, the nights he stayed awake praying for her to pass. Now, here he was, reduced to a domestic servant in the eyes of the woman he loved. She came back minutes later and stood over him, chewing gum. "Make sure you rinse them well. I don't want detergent stains on my lace panties," she said, then walked away like a queen inspecting a slave. When he finally returned to the gatehouse that evening, his hands were sore and his spirit broken. He didn't eat. He didn't speak to anyone. That night, he pulled out the notepad where he once wrote their dreams and tore the page that said Ngozi. But even then, his heart still battled his pride. He still asked himself if he was overreacting. Maybe she's stressed, he thought. Maybe this is just a phase. But deep down, he knew the truth. This wasn't just emotional manipulation. It was degradation. And she didn't even feel bad. She wore her cruelty like perfume, proudly and in public. It was no longer about love. It had become about power, control, and dominance. And Obinna was losing the battle. If there was ever a time when Obinna felt invisible, it was in the weeks that followed. Ngozi began to treat him with a kind of disdain usually reserved for stray animals. She would now drop her handbag at his feet as she walked into the compound, sometimes with her heels clicking dramatically on the pavement like a performance. "Take it to my room," she would order, even if he was clearly on duty. She used him like a servant, no longer even pretending to hide her contempt. But what broke him most was that others began to follow her lead. Chief Adekunle's driver, who used to respect him, now laughed at him openly. "See, lover boy," he'd say, pointing at Obinna, "still waiting for the madam that's eating our Oga's money." The mockery multiplied until it drowned Obinna's silence in shame. Her siblings, those children whose school fees Obinna had once paid, visited the estate during midterm break. Uju, the younger sister who used to call him Uncle Obi, now called him Gate Uncle with a smirk. Ikenna, once respectful, now rolled his eyes at him like the housemaids. They had clearly been told a different story. Perhaps Ngozi told them that she had made it on her own, or maybe she erased Obinna from their family history entirely. That afternoon, he tried to speak to them, offering them snacks like he used to, but they brushed past him coldly. Ngozi watched the whole scene and smirked from a distance. She had successfully rewritten the narrative. She had buried the past he shared with her under the glittering lies of her new life. And Obinna, helpless and wounded, had no voice in this new chapter. One evening, he tried one last time to remind her of all he had done. He met her near the garden and spoke softly. "Ngozi, I know I may not have much, but I've given you my sweat, my money, my heart. I've sacrificed everything. I paid your school fees, fed your siblings, worked myself to sickness. Don't I deserve better than this?" She looked at him, her eyes devoid of emotion. "Obinna, you don't get it," she replied coldly. "I never asked you for any of that. If you chose to play charity worker, that's your business. You're just a gateman. Don't confuse pity with love." Then she walked away, hips swaying, leaving him frozen in place. Those words would echo in his mind for weeks. That night, Obinna sat in his gatehouse and stared at his reflection in the broken mirror. He saw not a man, but a shadow. And it was in that moment that a small flame began to burn deep within him, a quiet, defiant fire that whispered, "One day, they will regret this." The estate was unusually quiet that afternoon, the air thick with Lagos heat and suppressed tension. Obinna stood by the main gate, lost in thought, when he saw Ngozi walking toward Chief Adekunle's private quarters again. She had barely arrived that morning, but already she was draped in the same lace gown Obinna once helped her purchase during her second year in school. She held it tightly to her waist, and a strong designer perfume lingered in the air behind her. Obinna's heart pounded as she walked past him like a stranger. But today, something snapped inside him. The years of humiliation, the countless nights of hunger, the broken promises and mocking stares, it all boiled to the surface. "Ngozi," he called out, not yelling, but firm. She stopped and turned with irritation in her eyes. "What is it this time?" she asked. "Please don't go in there," he pleaded. "We can still fix things. I know what we had meant something. I know I'm just a gateman now, but it won't always be like this." Her laughter cut through the still air like a whip. Loud, sarcastic, cruel. "What are you even saying, Obinna?" she scoffed, stepping closer to him, deliberately raising her voice so the maids and drivers nearby could hear. "You really think you're someone? You're a fool. You'll die opening gates. You're beneath me. I've outgrown you. Don't ever embarrass me like this again." Then, without breaking eye contact, she turned on her heels and continued into the quarters. Obinna's lips parted slightly, his arms limp at his sides, his soul crushed. The kitchen staff nearby chuckled. Even the elderly security guard, Baba Chucks, looked away awkwardly, ashamed on his behalf. Obinna turned and walked slowly back to his gatepost, his vision blurred by unshed tears. He sat down heavily on the wooden bench, staring into nothingness. Everything he had built, all his sacrifices, now lay in ruins, mocked and spat on by the very person he once called my future. Something broke that day, but what rose from it was not sadness. It was resolve. That night, as he sat alone in the gatehouse, he wrote a resignation letter on a torn sheet of paper. No laptop, no printer, just ink and pain. He folded it neatly, placed it on the chief's driver's seat, and took one final look around the estate. Every corner held a memory, where he once surprised Ngozi with a new phone, where he walked her siblings around during holidays, where he'd once knelt to fix a flat tire for Chief. It had all meant something to him, but to her it was all disposable. And so, without saying goodbye, he picked up the small bag that held his old notepad, 2 shirts, and a fading photo of his late mother, and he walked out of the compound under the cover of night. No one stopped him. No one noticed. And perhaps that was what hurt the most, that after all he had done, his exit was as invisible as his presence had always been. But inside him a whisper echoed, "They may not see me now, but they will remember me later." For 2 weeks, Obinna wandered the dusty streets of Lagos like a ghost with no destination. He stayed in a cheap face-me-I-face-you compound in Ojulegba, sharing a room with a struggling barber and eating roadside beans and gari. Every night, he would open his worn notepad and stare at the goals he once wrote. 10 buses. Real estate. Marrying Ngozi. Now, that last line was crossed out so harshly that the paper tore. Yet, the rest still burned in his heart. But dreams, he had learned, needed more than love to survive. They needed strength, and that strength often came from pain. One day, while walking past a busy junction, he saw a group of women hawking recharge cards and bus tickets. That was when the idea hit him. Transport. The very business he had always wanted. The buses, the fares, the people. It was all right in front of him. He didn't have money, but he had time. And the willingness to start from dirt. While scouting the park near CMS, he met Amarachi, a soft-spoken tailor selling handkerchiefs and thread. She was around his age, dark-skinned with bright eyes, and a gentle smile that didn't come with mockery or pride. He helped her chase away a tout who tried to steal her goods, and from that simple act, a bond began. She listened when he spoke, asked questions without judgment, and laughed without pretense. When he told her about his past, the girl he loved, the betrayal, the humiliation, she didn't pity him. Instead, she said, "Then build something that makes them regret ever mocking you." Her words echoed in him like thunder. Together, they started small. Amarachi stitched uniforms and sold them at bus parks. Obinna helped drivers and conductors with ticket recording in exchange for tips. At night, they counted coins together, calculating how much could be saved daily toward buying one used bus. They were two nobodies, building something from the dust. As weeks turned into months, Obinna began to smile again. The pain hadn't disappeared. It had simply transformed into fuel. Amarachi never asked him for anything. She supported his goals, shared his burdens, and helped him believe again. One night, she gave him an envelope containing 15,000 Nigerian nairas, her savings. "Use it for the registration of the bus license," she said. Obinna stared at her in shock. No one had ever believed in him like this. Not even Ngozi. In that moment, he realized something. Loyalty isn't proven through sweet words or promises. It's shown in actions, in sacrifice without conditions. Amarachi didn't have fancy gowns or foreign perfumes. But she had dignity. And she saw him. Not the gateman. Not the broken heart. But the man with a dream. And for the first time in months, Obinna didn't feel invisible anymore. Back at the estate, Ngozi's life seemed to shimmer on the surface. But beneath the gold-plated veneer, the cracks were already spreading. Chief Adekunle had now fully taken her in as his mistress, moving her into a sleek two-bedroom apartment in Victoria Island. She flaunted it on social media, new iPhone, Brazilian wigs, dinners at exclusive lounges. Soft life, her captions often read, with emojis of champagne glasses and dollar signs. To the world, she had upgraded. From the daughter of a poor widow to the companion of a man with 3 luxury cars. But behind closed doors, the fairy tale was far less charming. Chief was no lover, he was a user. He was controlling, dismissive, and cold. He reminded her often that she was replaceable. "Behave yourself. I can pick another girl from Unilag tomorrow," he once snapped during a disagreement. She laughed awkwardly, but the warning lingered. Her beauty was her currency, and it was depleting fast. Gone were the days of feeling admired or loved. Now, she was like a trophy on a dusty shelf, brought out only when convenient. Chief began traveling more and visiting less. Calls became shorter. Gifts stopped. The nights stretched into loneliness. She tried visiting the estate once to feel something familiar, but was told Obinna no longer worked there. "He just left," the driver had said. He looked different, like a man on a mission. Something twisted in her chest when she heard that. A strange mix of curiosity and guilt. But she shook it off. Let him go, she thought. What can a gateman achieve anyway? Still, she found herself stalking his old Instagram page at night, staring at their few pictures from school days, now long deleted. But the unease wouldn't go away. Then came the girls. One by one, Chief began inviting new women to his parties, slimmer, louder, trendier. One even moved into the guest room in the apartment. Ngozi's complaints were dismissed. "You're lucky I still keep you here," he barked. It was then she realized she wasn't the prize. She was a placeholder. The silent panic began. Her phone calls to Chief increased. Her makeup got heavier, and her smile more forced. But she was losing grip. Her sisters didn't call anymore. Her siblings avoided her. Even the maids in the apartment gossiped about her when she passed. The very house she thought was her palace was becoming her prison. The life she had chosen was now showing its teeth. And soon, the very man she had spat on, the one who washed her underwear, would return, not with a bucket, but with power. But for now, she was still dancing in gold sandals, blind to the cliff she was approaching. For months, Obinna and Amarachi continued to work tirelessly, waking up before dawn and returning to their shared corner room long after the sky turned black. Their hands were always busy, his pushing crates, her stitching fabric, but their minds were always building. Every naira was accounted for, every expense calculated. They didn't spend on luxury. Their dates were suya at roadside vendors and cold sachet water under the moonlight. But in those simple moments, they were building more than a business. They were building trust, a bond stronger than any promises. Then, one sunny afternoon at the Oshodi garage, the miracle came. A weary bus driver named Aya Lucky, frustrated by constant engine issues, announced that he was selling his Danfo bus. Obinna jumped on the opportunity. Though the bus was worn, the price was within reach, 380,000 Nigerian nairas. Amarachi added her full savings without hesitation, and Obinna borrowed the rest from a kind elderly conductor who believed in his ambition. The day the bus became theirs, Obinna didn't sleep. He cleaned every inch of the vehicle with his own hands, naming it Hope Express. It was old and noisy, but to him it was the vessel to freedom. He paid for a trusted driver and agreed to collect returns every day. The first few weeks were nerve-wracking. Repairs were frequent. One day, the gearbox failed, and Obinna had to sell his only pair of black leather shoes to fix it. But through all the breakdowns, rejections, and late-night arguments with passengers, he held on. Amarachi was always beside him, urging him to hold on. "Big men you admire today once sold bread on the street," she'd say, massaging his feet as they planned the next day. Soon, the bus began bringing in small profits, 4,000 Nigerian nairas a day, then 5,500 Nigerian nairas, then 7,000 Nigerian nairas. Obinna reinvested every kobo. Their name started spreading among local drivers. That Obinna boy no day play with money. Very serious. When some conductors tried to cheat him, Amarachi stormed their park with a logbook, shaming them with receipts. They started gaining respect. Within 6 months, Obinna had saved enough to buy a second fairly used bus. This time, a newer model. And with it, he registered his business, Obi Transport Ventures. On the day he collected the CAC certificate, he cried quietly in Amarachi's arms. Not from pain, but from pride. The same hands that once washed underwear now signed on business documents. And though the journey was still long, he was no longer walking. He was moving. "This is just the beginning," he whispered, staring at the rusted roof of their rented room. "But someday, Amarachi, someday they will call me Ogo Obinna." With 2 buses on the road and steady income coming in, Obinna and Amarachi officially moved into a self-contained one-room apartment in Surulere. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, had running water, and more importantly, it was theirs. Obinna painted the walls cream and hung a calendar of motivational quotes on the door. Every morning, they woke with a fresh purpose. Amarachi started attending a part-time tailoring course to improve her skills, while Obinna began studying logistics and urban transport strategies from free online sources at a local cafe. Though still small, their business had become structured. Drivers signed contracts. Daily returns were logged. Every naira was accounted for in ledgers. Amarachi handled the accounting, and Obinna oversaw operations. They made a formidable team. Their relationship wasn't defined by fancy dinners or expensive photos, but by shared pain, mutual sacrifice, and raw dedication. But success didn't come without enemies. Some older transport bosses noticed Obinna's rapid growth and began to sabotage him. His buses were blocked from loading stations. One of his drivers was threatened. Another was bribed and ran away with money. The setbacks were discouraging. Obinna began losing sleep, working night routes just to stay afloat. Amarachi watched with concern as he became thinner, his eyes tired. One evening, after a bus tire burst and injured a passenger, Obinna broke down. "Maybe I'm cursed," he whispered. "Maybe I'll never escape that gatehouse life." Amarachi didn't speak at first. She just walked to him and placed his hand on her chest. "You are not cursed. You are called. Some destinies need more fire before they shine." Her words pierced his soul. And from that night, Obinna stopped apologizing for dreaming. He began fighting harder. They expanded slowly but surely. By the end of the year, they had 5 buses and a small office, a converted shopfront in Mushin. They hired an extra admin staff and opened a small mechanic bay to service their vehicles. Amarachi branded the company shirts, and Obinna began attending local transport association meetings. People now called him Oga Obi with respect. But amidst the rising success, he never forgot the gate. He never forgot the pant washing, the mockery, the laughter. That pain stayed with him, not as a burden, but as fuel. He wrote a silent vow in his new notepad. "One day I will walk back into that estate, not as a gateman, but as its owner." And though it seemed like an impossible dream, Obinna smiled as he wrote it. Because now he knew something he didn't know back then. Nothing grows faster than the seed planted in tears. As Obi Transport Ventures gained footing in Lagos, Obinna began to dream bigger. He realized that transportation was only one arm of a larger body. Real estate was the spine. Every bus route he studied, every terminal he visited, he noticed one pattern. Landlords made more money than anyone else. The people who owned garages, shops, buildings, they didn't hustle under the sun. They let their land do the work. So Obinna began saving toward buying land. Not in Lekki or Ikoyi, but on the outskirts, in Abeju, Ikorodu, Ape. "Buy where you can afford, not where you wish," he often said. With Amarachi's help, he acquired 2 small plots in Ikorodu. One was swampy. The other was barely cleared. But to Obinna, they were gold. He hired bricklayers and began construction on 2 mini bungalows to rent out. The money was tight. He even sold his second phone to pay laborers. But he pressed on. Every brick laid was a slap in the face of everyone who called him worthless. With each block, Obinna's confidence grew. He started studying property laws, talking to land surveyors, even attending real estate investment seminars. He was often the only person in old jeans at those events. Others wore suits and drove Benzes, but he didn't care. He was building legacy, not image. Amarachi supported him fully, sewing uniforms by day and baking small pastries to sell at night. They barely slept, but there was joy in their suffering. One day, Obinna stood in front of one of his almost completed buildings and said to himself, "This is not just cement. This is revenge." And in many ways, it was. With every corner of the structure, he was rebuilding what Ngozi and Chief had torn apart. His dignity, his faith, his identity. The house wasn't just shelter. It was evidence. Evidence that the boy they once spat on had refused to remain on the ground. Soon, the rentals began bringing in monthly income. Not much, but enough to count. Obinna used that to buy 2 more buses, taking his fleet to 7. His name was now familiar in both the transport and local property scenes. He rebranded his company as Obi Holdings, a name that covered both his transport and real estate arms. People began to ask, "Who is this guy?" Rumors spread that he came for money. No one could imagine that this young man with vision, employees, and branded shirts once stood at an estate gate washing clothes for a girl who now lived in regret. Obinna, however, never corrected them. He didn't care about telling his past. He was too focused on writing his future. And the pen, at last, was in his hands. Obinna stood at the Murtala Muhammad International Airport in a well-fitted gray kaftan, holding a black travel bag with his initials embroidered in gold. It was his first time flying out of Nigeria, not for pleasure, but for purpose. He had been invited to an African logistics and real estate investment forum in Johannesburg after one of his proposals gained attention online. Amarachi, radiant in a new Ankara gown she stitched herself, stood beside him, holding his arm with pride. They didn't arrive in a convoy or with camera flashes. but there was something powerful about their presence. Their journey from nothing to this very moment had not been sponsored by luck. It was paid for in sweat, tears, and scars. On the flight, Obinna could barely sleep. Not because he was nervous, but because he was visualizing. He wasn't just attending a conference. He was entering a new realm, a bigger battlefield. One where his past would no longer be relevant, only his vision. In South Africa, Obinna soaked in every detail of the conference like a sponge. He attended every workshop, networked with industry veterans, and pitched his hybrid model, integrating transport terminals with mini residential estates in emerging urban zones. Most people were impressed, but they were more shocked when they learned he had started as a security guard. A gateman, one Kenyan investor asked, eyes wide. Obinna smiled. Yes, that was the seed. This is the tree. By the end of the event, he had secured 2 partnership offers from transport tech firms in Ghana and Rwanda. They offered access to digital fleet tracking systems and joint funding for new hubs across West Africa. Amarachi managed the documents, sealed every deal, and ensured their legal consultant in Lagos was kept in the loop. When they returned to Nigeria, the applause from the terminal wasn't for celebrities. It was for Obinna and Amarachi. The local press picked up their story, titling one piece, From Gatehouse to Global Stage, The Rise of Obi Holdings. Obinna's growth exploded after that trip. New clients came knocking. His company signed distribution contracts with e-commerce firms, converted 2 of his buildings into hybrid warehouse housing units, and added 3 new interstate buses to the fleet. His staff strength increased, as did the number of young people inspired by his story. Obinna also launched a small mentorship series for youth in Ajigunle, Mushin, and Surulere. Every Saturday, he met with 15 boys, teaching them business ethics, emotional discipline, and how to use pain as fuel. He didn't teach them to dream. He taught them to plan. Amarachi suggested he document his journey into a mini-book, and within months, The Gate Was My Beginning became a bestseller among youth entrepreneurs. Corporate sponsors began calling. TV shows invited him, and as his face graced magazine covers, one question began to buzz louder than all others. Who exactly is this man, and where did he come from? But Obinna never answered it fully. He simply smiled and replied, I came from the background, but I refused to stay there. Within 2 years, Obinna had crossed the threshold from rising entrepreneur to full-fledged millionaire. But he didn't announce it with champagne or a convoy of expensive SUVs. Instead, he hosted a small Thanksgiving event in his compound. Nothing fancy, just close friends, loyal workers, and the children he mentored from the slums. His Lagos mansion, nestled in a private estate he had helped design, became a living monument to perseverance. The house was not gaudy, but graceful. White pillars, wide glass windows, an inner courtyard with a fountain, and Amarachi's sewing studio on the top floor. On one wall in his private office, Obinna hung a framed note from years ago, the crumpled page from his old notepad with the line by land. Own buses. Become Oga Obinna. He had made it. But the journey was far from over. If anything, the real game was just beginning. Obi Holdings officially registered regional branches across Nigeria, Abeokuta, Port Harcourt, Enugu, Abuja. His fleet of buses reached 50. He established partnerships with estate developers in Ibadan and Asaba, building affordable housing units with integrated transport access. For many, his business model was revolutionary, cutting commute stress while solving housing problems. But to Obinna, it was more personal. If you solve real problems, he often said, money will chase you. His face appeared on talk shows, investment panels, even TEDx. Yet, through it all, he never once bought the loud luxury other rich men flaunted. No gold chains. No vanity jets. His watch was clean, but modest. His car a black Prado. Amarachi continued to wear self-made Ankara gowns, even as tailors begged her to switch to foreign labels. They remained grounded, not because they feared falling, but because they respected the ladder they had climbed. As their wealth increased, Obinna began building a charity arm, the Obi Foundation. It focused on youth empowerment, vocational skills, and business incubation for ex-prisoners, widows, and young boys like he once was. Amarachi took special interest in single mothers, especially those abandoned by men after pregnancies. She created a free fashion training program and a daycare for their children. Obinna and Amarachi had become more than entrepreneurs. They were forces of change. Yet, amidst all the blessings, a whisper began to tug at Obinna's heart. A quiet echo from the past. The image of a gate. A girl's laughter. A bag of dirty clothes. The sting of rejection. No matter how high he climbed, that memory lingered like a shadow. And so, one evening, while sipping zobo on their balcony, Obinna said, "Amarachi, it's time. I need to go back there. I need to stand at that same gate, but this time not in a uniform." Amarachi smiled. She already knew. Let's make the call. The old estate hadn't changed much. The tall white walls, the paved compound, the security lights, it was all still there, like a time capsule waiting to be cracked open. But this time, Obinna arrived in a different fashion. A convoy of 3 black SUVs slowly pulled up at the entrance. The first carried his assistant and a legal team. The second held project documents and blueprints. And the last, a custom Prado, held Obinna and Amarachi, dressed in elegant but understated native attire. The security guard at the gate blinked, confused. "Who would they find?" he asked. Obinna stepped out and smiled. "Tell Chief Adekunle that Obi Holdings is here for the estate purchase inspection." Within minutes, whispers flew across the estate. "Isn't that the boy that used to be the gateman? No be lie. See him now. He fine pass Oga. Nawao. God day." But Obinna wasn't there for drama. He was there for closure. He was now buying the estate's entire eastern wing. Chief Adekunle had fallen into financial trouble after poor investments and needed quick liquidity. Obinna's company had been contacted discreetly to bid for the land. But when Obinna saw the address, his heart skipped. Fate had drawn the circle. The same ground that once witnessed his humiliation would now bear his signature. Amarachi handled the documentation, while Obinna toured the compound with a cool, calm confidence. He saw the old bench he once sat on, the garden where he'd waited to speak to Ngozi, the washing area where he had knelt over soaked panties, broken but hopeful. It was all still there, but the boy who once bowed was long gone. In his place stood a man who had rewritten the very script others wrote him out of. By evening, the deal was sealed. Obi Holdings now owned the estate. As Obinna walked out, staff lined up quietly, unsure whether to greet or salute. One of the younger maids whispered, "Welcome back, sir." He paused, turned slowly, and said with a soft smile, "Thank you. This time, I'm here to stay." As he stepped into the SUV beside Amarachi, his phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. 4 words, "Obinna, please call me." His heart stopped. He didn't need to ask who. He knew that tone, that desperation. That was the voice of a woman whose palace had crumbled, whose throne had turned to dust, and who now remembered the hands that once carried her when she had nothing. Obinna stared at the screen for a long moment. Amarachi leaned close. "Will you call her?" she asked. He exhaled. "Not yet, but soon. Let her feel the silence I once drowned in." And with that, they drove off, richer not just in money, but in meaning. Obinna had always told Amarachi that when real success arrived, it would not need to scream. It would walk in and silence every room. That prophecy came true at the National Business Summit in Abuja. Obi Holdings was awarded the most innovative indigenous logistics and property enterprise, and Obinna was invited to deliver a keynote speech. Dressed in a tailored navy blue kaftan with golden embroidery stitched by Amarachi herself, Obinna stood on stage beneath glowing lights and a hall filled with governors, CEOs, foreign investors, and media. He didn't begin with facts and figures. He began with a story. There was once a gateman who believed he could do more than open gates. People laughed. One person spat. One mocked. But he never stopped dreaming. The room went silent. The silence then gave way to thunderous applause. Phones lit up. Tweets flew. Hashtags began trending. Hashtag Obinna the Billionaire. Hashtag From Gate to Greatness. Hashtag Obi Power. By the time he stepped down from that stage, Obinna's name was no longer just known. It was immortalized. Corporate endorsements rolled in. Banks requested partnerships. NGOs offered to collaborate. His photos circulated online like wildfire, especially the one where he knelt to appreciate Amarachi after receiving the award. Behind every rising man, he said at the podium, is a woman who didn't wait for him at the top but helped him climb from the bottom. That quote went viral. People began comparing their love to classic novels. Wedding blogs called them the modern-day Oba and Queen. But beyond the accolades and lights, Obinna remained grounded. He knew what it meant to have your hands smell of detergent from washing your girlfriend's panties, only for her to call you an embarrassment. That pain had taught him to honor his present, but never forget his past. Despite his success, Obinna kept his daily routine simple. Every Monday, he met with his park managers and real estate leads. Every Friday, he attended vocational training sessions at the Obi Foundation, often teaching a class himself. And every Sunday, he and Amarachi would walk the community park, holding hands, watching kids play in the centers they funded. The more he grew, the more he poured back into society. But beneath the surface of grace and peace, the whispers grew louder. That a certain woman from Obinna's past was now asking questions. That she had fallen from glory. That she had been dumped and disgraced. And that perhaps she now regretted everything. Obinna never replied when reporters asked. He just smiled and said, "Life gives everyone a chance to choose who they want to be. Some choose gold. Some choose grit. Some choose others. But I chose myself." And with that quiet strength, he left the world curious, waiting for what would happen next. The apartment in Victoria Island had become a haunted palace. Where once there had been lights, parties, perfumes, and heels, now there were unpaid bills, silence, and desperation. Chief Adekunle had grown tired of Ngozi. Her attitude, once bold and spicy, now irritated him. Her demands became too much, and her body language no longer excited him. New, younger girls flooded his DMs, and eventually, one found her way into the guest room, then into his heart. One morning, Ngozi returned from a failed shopping trip only to find her belongings packed in black trash bags. "What is this?" she screamed. Chief didn't flinch. He simply said, "Your time is past. Get out before I call security." Her voice trembled. "After everything I gave you?" He laughed cruelly. "You gave me your body. I paid. We're even." That moment broke her. She collapsed on the stairs, screaming, but no one came to help. The drivers watched silently. The chef turned his back, and the new girl laughed from the balcony. Ngozi moved into a friend's apartment in Acadia, but even that friendship didn't last. Her social media fans noticed the downgrade and began to mock her. People whispered, "Is this not the same girl that called her boyfriend a gateman?" Jobless, cashless, and emotionally bankrupt, Ngozi turned to her siblings. But they were grown now, one in NYSC, the other a hairdresser, and both had long resented her for destroying the only man who ever truly loved them. "Obinna would have been our family today if you hadn't chased him away," Uju spat. "He was feeding us, paying school fees, doing everything. But you wanted lace and luxury. Look at you now." That sentence cut deep. Ngozi left in tears. She tried starting a hair business with her last savings, but it failed. No customer came twice. She had attitude, but no humility. She had looks, but no loyalty. The Lagos she once ruled now rejected her. Her desperation grew. She scrolled through Obinna's images online, the cars, the foundation, the love with Amarachi, and she broke inside. She saw him shaking hands with senators, blessing orphans, mentoring youths. Every image screamed the same message: you chose wrong. She thought of reaching out, then hesitated. But pride gave way to hunger. So one evening, shaking and shivering, she sent him a text. "Obinna, please call me." No reply. A week passed. She sent another. Still silence. And then, when her rent notice arrived and her friend finally kicked her out, she did the unthinkable. She walked barefoot in a second-hand gown to Obinna's headquarters, praying to God he would see her. When the receptionist asked who she was, she whispered, "I'm his past, and I just want to say sorry." The lobby of Obi Holdings was like a different planet. All glass, art, flowers, and discipline. Staff moved with confidence, dressed in company-branded uniforms, heads held high. Ngozi stood out like a misplaced puzzle piece. Her eyes were swollen, her wig frazzled, and her hands trembling. She clutched her bag as if it held the last pieces of her pride. "Do you have an appointment with Mr. Obinna?" the receptionist asked. Ngozi's throat burned. "No, but I need to see him. Please." The woman gave her a once-over and clicked her tongue. "Wait," she said and called upstairs. A few minutes later, the elevator opened, not with Obinna, but with Amarachi. Clad in a wine-colored gown, elegant and composed, Amarachi stepped into the lobby and saw her. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Amarachi said softly, "He's in a meeting. But I'll tell him you came." Ngozi dropped to her knees. "Please, please, just tell him I'm sorry. I was foolish. I threw away gold." Her voice cracked. I mocked him. I disgraced him. But I need help." Amarachi looked at her, eyes calm, then slowly sat on the edge of a nearby couch. "You know," she said, "when I met Obinna, he didn't have money. But he had vision. And he had wounds. Deep ones. From you." Ngozi sobbed. I know. Please, I was young. I thought money was everything." Amarachi nodded. "And now you see what money without character leads to." For a long moment, there was silence. Ngozi trembled, ashamed, broken. Then, just as she attempted to rise, a new presence filled the room. Obinna had entered, flanked by two aides. He paused when he saw her. He didn't blink. He didn't smile. He simply looked. Their eyes met, and in that silent collision, the past replayed like a movie. The gate, the panties, the insults, the tears. And now the reversal. Ngozi dropped completely to the floor. "Obinna, please. I beg you. Just a second chance. Even if you don't love me, just let me start again." His staff began recording discreetly. The moment was going viral already. Obinna walked forward slowly and stopped inches from her kneeling form. "Ngozi," he said, his voice like thunder wrapped in calm, "I once loved you with everything I had. You spat on that love. You made me doubt myself. You buried me alive." She wept. "I didn't know you'd rise." He leaned forward and whispered, "That was your mistake. You thought I'd remain at the gate. But I wasn't built for gates. I was built for kingdoms." Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. Amarachi followed, pausing only to hand Ngozi an envelope. "That's a job referral for a maid agency. You wanted help. That's what we give the broken, a start, not a stage." And with that, the doors closed. And Ngozi was left on the cold, tiled floor, shattered, sobbing, and silenced by the very story she once thought she was above. The next morning, the entire country buzzed with one name, Obinna. Social media exploded with footage of Ngozi kneeling at OB Holdings' lobby, begging the man she once called just a gateman. Blogs reposted the video with titles like From Lover to Legend, How Obinna Silenced His Past, and The Ultimate Clapback, Billionaire Rejects Ex Who Mock Him. Thousands praised his calmness, his class, his poise. But inside his private office, Obinna wasn't celebrating. He sat in silence, eyes resting on the Lego skyline, the morning sun stretching across the glass window like a painting. Amarachi entered with 2 cups of warm ginger tea and placed one beside him. "She won't forget yesterday," she said. He nodded. "She's not supposed to. That moment was her mirror. I didn't need to punish her. Life already did." He sipped slowly. "I don't hate her. But I can't forgive her either. Not yet." That afternoon he held a press conference, not to address the viral incident, but to launch the Gatekeeper Initiative, a mentorship and investment platform for young men and women in low-income jobs. Security guards, cleaners, domestic workers. "Many of our people start at the gate," he told the audience. "But that gate is not their final bus stop. We will give them tools to build, not just survive." The crowd applauded. Cameras flashed. But the emotion in the room was real. His words touched hearts, especially those who had once been dismissed, overlooked, and mocked like he was. He named the headquarters building Hope Tower. On the top floor, a plaque was installed with the inscription, "To the broken, the mocked, the forgotten keep building. One day, the world will knock on your gate. Later that night, alone with Amarachi in their bedroom, Obinna finally opened the envelope she had handed Ngozi. Inside it was a referral letter to a domestic staffing agency, a 50,000 Nigerian nairas transport allowance, and a handwritten note that simply said, "Use this to start again, but don't step on others while you rise." Amarachi asked him if he felt it was too kind. Obinna shook his head. "No, I'm not helping her. I'm helping the girl she used to be, the one who had dreams, before pride and greed swallowed her." Amarachi stared at him with pride. "You're a king, Obinna." He smiled, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "I'm not a king. I'm a builder, and the foundation of my life was poured with tears. Hers were just the first to fall." That night, he slept peacefully. No nightmares, no regrets, because at last he had stood tall in the same place where he was once made to kneel, not to take revenge, but to build something greater than revenge, legacy. A year later, the sun rose bright over the open-air venue, where Obi Foundation was unveiling a new boarding school for orphans and displaced children. The stage was decorated with white cloth and gold ribbons. Dignitaries filled the chairs. Children, neatly dressed in matching uniforms, sang welcome songs. Obinna walked to the podium in a clean, cream-colored agbada. His face was calm. His beard now had streaks of wisdom. Amarachi stood by his side, holding his hand. Cameras zoomed in as he spoke. "We are here today because pain can build or destroy. I chose to build. I once stood at a gate and was told I'd never rise. But God used that gate as my classroom. The woman who mocked me gave me my first lesson. Never love someone who doesn't see your worth. The man who hired me taught me my second. Power without character is poison. But the woman who stood by me, Amarachi, taught me my final lesson. True loyalty is silent, deep, and patient." The crowd rose to their feet in applause. Some cried. Others held hands. That day, Obinna unveiled the Stone Program, a fully funded scholarship for 100 underprivileged children annually, named after the Bible verse. The stone which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Engraved into the school's main hall was that very quote, beside a statue of a young man in a gateman's uniform holding a book. As the ribbon was cut, Obinna felt the full weight of his journey. Every insult, every humiliation, every disappointment had led to this. He was no longer just a man who survived. He had created a world for others to thrive. And that made him wealthier than any billionaire with gold chains and noisy parties. He turned pain into purpose. And he made silence speak louder than screams ever could. Meanwhile, in a dusty backstreet in Ajij, Ngozi mopped floors in a small duplex owned by a retired civil servant. Her madam shouted constantly. Her clothes were cheap, her makeup gone, her eyes dim. She avoided mirrors now. They reminded her of who she could have been. Every Sunday, she watched Amarachi and Obinna on TV, smiling, donating, speaking, building. She didn't cry anymore. The tears had dried. All that remained was emptiness. One morning, she passed a boy reading a newspaper. On the cover was Obinna beside a newly elected governor, smiling. The headline read, "Obi Holdings expands into 10 states." The boy pointed and said, "That man not billionaire now, oh dem say start his security." Ngozi walked past silently. No words, just shame, because the world now knew the story, and she would always be the girl who chose the throne and lost the king. And Obinna? He was no longer the rejected stone. He had become the cornerstone. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.